10 seconds.
Okay. You know that I have read all your research papers. I mean, all your slides, the one
Oh, wow.
you
Thank
share.
you so much. Thank you. We'll come back to that later.
Very, very interesting. No, it was important in order to take some notes.
Thank you so much. I think we're live right now, and I would like to say hello and welcome to everyone. Today on December 11 is the second session of our workshop cycle that is called Women's Unspoken Questions to Contemporary Society. My name is Elena, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Village Women for Economy. And today we are going to talk about the topic that is dedicated to falling down of women's occupation during the pandemic. In our first workshop, we talked about how smart is smart working, because the way women work was so deeply shaped by the pandemic, and smart working didn't really contribute positively to it, even the way it sometimes seems to. And the way technology shapes our work is really important to study and discuss in details. And today we are going to talk about the occupation in the female labor market and how it was shaped and impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our structure is pretty simple for today, but very interactive. So firstly, our participants are going to share their personal experience and their realities, and the realities in their countries. So we'll have 3 participants talking about their home countries from the Village Women for Economy, and then we'll have a guest who will talk on behalf of the Village CO2 Inequalities. And in the end, we are very happy to welcome Gianna Martinengo, who is a digital entrepreneur who would give a general overview of the situation. So right now, I would like to give a word to Cristina Peperia Vircelli, who is the economist from Brazil. She's a PhD and master in economics, and also she's INOF Academy Research Fellow. Her research is about economics, care economy, paid and unpaid care work, and labor market. So, Christina, the floor is yours, and could you please share with us some information about your research and how it is related to falling down of the female occupation within the pandemic?
Thank you very much, Elena. It's a great pleasure to be with you and with Professor Gianna, Daniele, Valentina, Barbara, and Diana, sharing this results for the women labor market during the pandemic, which was, I think that I'm very concerned in my research because I will show you some database from Brazil about women in the labor market. Now, beginning with the participation in the labor market by rate, we have one of the things that happens during this time is that the women decrease their participation during the pandemic. We have this database between 2015 until 2021. And we can see that historically the women have a low rate of participation comparison to men. The participation rate between women is 50% and men is 70% in average. But during the pandemic, we have a decrease between the women that decreased for 47.3% in the third quarter of 2020. Between men also decreased for 68.6%, but the decrease for women was deeper than for men. And we have a recovery in 2021, but it's not in the same rate that we have in the years that was previous. Was in the after the pandemic. So we don't know what will happen with the women in the labor market in with past the pandemic. And also the women also increased their unemployment rate during this time. The unemployment rate in Brazil increased a lot during the 2014 until 2021. This is not a trend that happens only during the pandemic. We have economic crisis that precedes the pandemic and politics crisis too. So in 2017, we have during the 2040 until 2017, we have increasing the unemployment rate between men and women. But in the pandemic, we can see in this graph during 2020, the rate, the unemployment rate between women and men increased deeply, but between women was very higher than men. In the fourth quarter of 2020, the unemployment rate between women was almost 20%, 12.5%. And in 2021, we have a decrease of this rate, but this not represents a position, good position in the labor market. We have increase also in the informality and self-employed position, because we don't have overview of recover of the labor market, and between women this trend is worse. This is the combination tax of unemployment rate and underutilization rate by gender in Brazil. So we can see that during the pandemic, the situation worsened a lot, even for men and for women, but more for women. This combination tax of unemployment and underutilization seems that represent the persons that wants to work more, or that are in the position that they are not. They are very vulnerable position, or they are unemployed. So in the third quarter of 2020, there are 36.7% of women that was underutilization, and between men, this tax was 25.4%. We have a decrease in this rate in the 2021, but the rate for women are very high, 33.3%, and historically is very high. So we don't know what will happen in the further years with women, because and this is something important to say, during the pandemic. And this happens in the entire world, but during the pandemic, we have impact of positions that women were more represented, like the sectors of education, health, and also the paid domestic workers. That is very important position for women in Brazil. We have in Brazil 6 million of the paid domestic workers, and during the pandemic, these domestic workers was laid off. So we have a decrease of number in the paid domestic workers, but also we have a decrease in the workers in private sectors. That is a position that are characteristically more have more formal workers, and the rate of informal is not so high in this work in private sector. So we have a decrease for men and women in this position, and also we have an increase in the self-employed workers and auxiliary family workers, but more in the self-employed workers. So we have this Uberization of the economy that impacts men and women, but for women that are in a position that are more vulnerable in the labor market historically, we have this increase of the vulnerable for women. And this is worse for women that are in some situation of poor situation, that are single mothers. And one thing that also happens during the pandemic is the increasing of unpaid care work. This is something that happens for all women, but we have deeply increasing for the Black women. That 52% respond this survey that answered this survey that they increasing their responsible for take care of other persons, and for the white was 46% and indigenous 50%. So historically, the women have this care in the unpaid care work is more for women. And during the pandemic, this increased too much because of the characteristics of the pandemic. The people stay at home, and the care work inside their homes increasing in this time, and impacts the women in the labor market too. Now I'm finishing my presentation. This is the ratio between average wage by gender between the fourth quarter of 2014 until fourth quarter of 2020. We can see here that the ratio between women and men are decreasing during this until 2019, because we have a higher index of informality for men, and because of this, the men decrease their wage, and the wage between men and women are paired in this time. But we don't know what will happen in the next years, because the pandemic impacts more the wages, the women wages, and probably the women will be more time in unemployment positions. So this may increase the gender pay gap in Brazil for the next years. So some conclusions here. The pandemic impacts women and men in labor market, and in the labor market, in situation of the labor market that was very bad for the workers. The informality was very high, but the situation increased too much this vulnerability, increasing the unemployment rate and informality. Because of the characteristics of the pandemic, women was more impacted than men. And one of these characteristics is the increasing of women unpaid care work. We have another characteristic, that the increasing of violence against women, but unfortunately we don't have the database about this, but we have some surveys that point for this side. So this the increasing of violence against women also decrease the participation of women in the labor market, also impacts the participation of women in the labor markets. And probably this increase the inequality in labor market is that the database are showing, but we don't have the database for 2021 and also for 2020, the entire year. So the database are very earlier, but probably this will stand for a long time if we don't have any politics to fight against this situation. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christina. It was very clear, deep, and very interesting information. And right now we're moving from Brazil, Latin America, to France. Danielle, you're connected from France, Paris, right? Aren't you?
Yeah, right.
And Danielle Monsef is an agriculture engineer from Lebanon, but living in Paris, and she works at the World Bank on urban resilience projects and on gender aspect in infrastructure financement. So Danielle, could you please share with us information about two countries, about Lebanon and France? What is the reality of women in the labor market in those two countries.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Elena. And very happy to be with you today, with all of you. So I will try to share my screen. Today I will talk about like a case study of Lebanon and France. Lebanon is a developing country and France is a developed one. And let's see how the two countries like try to solve the problem and the economic recession by the techniques and how women were affected in these two countries. So the coronavirus pandemic and the contained measures have plugged the global economy into a deep contraction. Some countries were better prepared than others, but today I will focus more on the two countries, Lebanon and France. So if we see that the GDP in the two countries fell down, but based on the analysis undertaken by the World Bank, almost 40% of contraction in real GDP where Lebanon lived it. $54 billion US dollar. The GDP dropped from $54 billion in 2018 to $33 billion in 2020. This is huge. It's 40%. In France, the GDP dropped from 2.7 trillion, 798, till 2.63. So it's 5.7%. So many employees lost their job, obviously, because the employer closed or lost business due to the pandemic, or people that already worked in like global trade field, tourism, export, restoration, had to stop their business. So the unemployment passed in 2018 in France from 9 till 8.6, and in Lebanon from 6 till 661. Like it wasn't so bad, the overall employment. But if we just compare the total employment to the female unemployment in Lebanon, we can see that the unemployment in 2003 was 9.8 in France and was in 2020 8.35, and in Lebanon it was 9.61 till 14.35. If we dig more, we can see that this is like not possible. The women lost like the major part of jobs were lost by women, if we can see, because we just said that the total employment wasn't that bad, unemployment, but we see here the difference between the prepared countries and the less prepared countries. So during the time of crisis, there is a tendency to pursue a gender equality. That gender equality has to be considered as second, and the globe, we need to focus on the global crisis before, and then after we have achieved the economic growth recovery, we can think about this. But however, the reality is that taking steps toward gender equality is critical to address the social and economic stability. And we can see that if we compare these two countries. So in conclusion, what we can say that if we support women to enter the economy, we will have the potential to support the fiscal sustainability and contribute directly to the growth of our country. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Right now, we are going to our next participant, the last participant of Women for Economy Village, Valentina Erasmo, who is going to share information about Italy. So Valentina is EOF Academy Research Fellow and who is working on PhD in ethics and economics and history of economic thought. So could you please share with us some information about your
Yes.
research and about the situation in Italy? You're welcome.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. Just a moment, please. Okay. Well, these are the data about the falling down of women occupation during pandemic in Italy. Still in 2019, the employment rate for women was about the 80% point lower than that of men. Thus, some inequalities still exist before this pandemic. In turn, the national gap was very relevant because the employment rate for women was about 60% at the north, while about 33% at the south. In turn, the average wage for women in Italy was about the 60% of men. About the main fields where women were employed in 2019, those fields were those of trade, health and social care, as well as school. But these inequalities that we had in Italy in 2019 before the pandemic were even greater if we consider the Italian data compared to the other data of the European Union country. In particular, Italy was at the last place about the EU Gender Equality Index. And this is, I think, a very relevant point for our analysis. Focusing on the data that we have during the pandemic about the evolution of women occupation during the pandemic in Italy, we have that between the second trimester of the 2019 and the second trimester of 2020, we have a general amount of job losses, about 841,000 places, but most of these job losses were of women, about the 56% of these job losses. This data is very relevant because contributes to the rising of general inactive women in Italy, with a total increasing of 8.5% in this period during the pandemic. But which were the labor activity interested by job losses during the pandemic in Italy? These job losses were about self-employed women, precarious women workers, but also women domestic workers, in particular housekeepers and babysitters, but also women employees. Which kind of answer we may provide to this question? Why have Italian women paid a so high price during this pandemic? And I would like to suggest you some hypotheses. First, self-employed women and precarious women workers can be more easily fired. In turn, the demand of the women domestic workers is collapsed principally because of smart working. Furthermore, women employees continued to work also during the spring 2020 lockdown, especially women, because as I told you in the first slide, these women in Italy were principally employed in offering services like school, health, and public administration. During the spring lockdown, schools were closed, and about 30% of these women who were employees had decided to assist their child during distance learning, and abandoned their jobs because they were afraid of managing life and work, because they were employees, but also mother and wives. And it was a very difficult time for women with a complete life like this. But we have also other non-economic consequences on women's condition during the pandemic in Italy. I would would just consider one point that I think is the most relevant one according to an ethical point of view, and this is the rising of domestic violence. We don't have very precise data, but the calls to helplines for domestic violence are significantly diminished during the spring lockdown, about a decreasing of 55%. These women could not ask for help. This is a very relevant. Finally, I would conclude with a thought-provoking slide, and this is about the European Union data about violence during the pandemic. And we have no data. Sometimes missing data could be more expressive than the available data. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Valentina, especially for the last two slides that raise a very important topic that can be hardly expressed with figures. But those figures, even if we have them or do not have them, they are hot. They are not just cold numbers. They express much more than just that.
More human side.
Yes, unfortunately, the reality is the way we have heard from you, and we really hope it might change onwards. Thank you so much. And right now, we are coming to the contribution of our guest from CO2 Inequalities Village, Gianna Saldago from Portugal. And my dear friend, she's occupational therapist promoting inclusion of children with disabilities in public schools. She's got a master's degree in psychological rehabilitation and another one in social economics. She doesn't work specifically about women on gender issues, but she's always ready to fight against all kinds of inequalities. And we would be very happy right now to hear about the situation in Portugal with special focus on inequalities.
Thank you, Alina. It's a pleasure to join the Women for Economy and to be here today. So I will try to share my screen. Please let me know if you are already seeing it. I hope so. Is that working?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so to better understand the COVID impact, I will start to show you firstly the Portuguese background about gender issues related with work and education. So in Portugal, the numbers indicate that at education level, men are the ones who continue to have more access, even if this difference has been decreasing. Only at the level of the higher education, women show their primacy. Regarding also, if we look to the tables about employment and unemployment, we can see that regarding work, men continue to have a higher percentage of employment, with women being the most affected by unemployment rates. As we can see in Portugal, the national minimum wage is quite low, and most of the workers, especially women, receive this payment. So the difference in wages between men and women is significant, with the difference tending to become more significant with age increase. And in Portugal, like in many other places, unfortunately, notwithstanding some evolutions, it is still women that took most care of the family, almost twice as much time as men, as well of taking care of the house, where the difference is even higher, as we can see in these clear images. So we can say that in Portugal, girls have a better school performance, being more likely to attend higher education. However, women have more difficulties to enter the labor market and are paid less for jobs with the same kind of qualifications. Also, the average female wage is 40% lower than the male wage, and is 26th amongst, if we are talking about seniors. When it comes to workers with basic education, the gender pay gap is even higher, as we can see in these clear numbers, where almost half of the women between 25 and 34 have higher education degree in 2020 compared to 35% of their male peers, which is a higher difference also. So regarding the pandemics, concerning the situation here during the pandemic, there are still a few published studies. However, preliminary data shows that Portugal has the fifth country in Europe where the pandemic had the greatest impact on the labor market, affecting mainly those who were already vulnerable before, as many of you already said. So there was an increase in female unemployment, and people are also moving from being unemployed to become inactive. The reduction in numbers of the hours of paid work also have been greater for women. Since women work mainly in tourism, restaurants, care service, and direct service to the public, they have been greatly affected by the pandemic, not only by the layoff that many of these companies or service went to, as we see in the graphic, but also by the greater exposed to the disease. The closure of daycare centers and schools has led to more work and unpaid hours, mostly for women. So the proportion of women in full-time telework was also higher. And also in Portugal, there was a financial support for parents who stayed at home to accompany their children. And 80% of these beneficiaries were women. So we can say that they were the ones that left their work and assumed this support. The main consequences of this gap between genders are that there is a less desire to have children, there's a decrease in productivity, also an increase in relational crisis, and we can see a lot of divorces happening now, and less health and a decrease of the quality in life here in Portugal. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Diana, for your contribution. It was very interesting, and it's very important for us to have a general overview picture about the reality in different countries. And right now, I would like to give a word to our special guest, Gianna Martinengo, who would make a general conclusion and create the overview of the situation that is relevant to different situations and to the whole world, understanding of how we can treat and how we can see the falling down of women's employment after the pandemic. So Gianna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you to everybody. I am so proud to be with you. I've listened to your work and your research. I'm trying today to give some insights for our common future. Thanks, Elena, for helping me with my slides. I have to introduce myself very briefly. I am an entrepreneur, a founder of a company that was the first one in Italy in 1983 to anticipate the centrality of humans in technologies. I was also president and founder of Women and Technologies, that is an association who was interested in fighting the stereotypes that technologies are not a work for women. And we are involved in discussing or in trying to understand what women can do for technologies and technologies for women. Last year, I was involved and I was asked to be part of an important international board of STOA. STOA is the panel for the future of science and technology at the European Parliament. I had the possibility in my work and in my career to meet many persons and research center, business, technological, entrepreneur, etc. I had the possibility, being a pioneer in my sector, to found many startups in Italy and abroad. I developed more than 800 projects, and the most important thing is that the research and development activities have enabled me to get in touch and work with more than 400 companies, centers, universities in Europe, USA, Canada, China, and Brazil. So today I feel at home with so many persons coming from all over the world. Well, first slide. These are my keywords and are the keywords we are dealing with in this very short talk. It's true that the pandemic has hit women heavily. It's true that job loss coupled with a worsening pay inequalities increased the commitment to child and family care, increased the domestic violence, have determined, above all in women, anxiety and depression in this population. Work in particular has been heavily affected, and technology has become part of women's life, shortening time and space. But it's true that healthy emergency has also taught a new way of working and improve digital inclusion for women, but also increased social inequalities in families. If I have to analyze the situation, a general situation, after reading all the papers I have received, and I thank you for giving them in advance, I think that there is a deep feeling of uncertainty for the future. We fear a poor health security. We feel that we are not able to exploit our professional potential. So the economic difficulties imposed by this period generated negative experience. And I think that we have altogether the necessity to work in order to activate an effective resilience strategy to cope with them, above all, women. But starting from my first keywords, isolation, second slide. Well, during pandemia, we experienced an aspect that was typical of marginalized communities, isolation. Who are the marginalized communities? Are those who are excluded from mainstream, that is of social, economic, education, for culture, due to race, gender, age, language, geography, sexual attitude. Well, we never had this experience in general. But what has isolation do with contactless? And it's interesting to consider that the ideology of distancing was and is spreading in all sectors of society, even before pandemia. Think of the banking sector, the rapid developing contactless payment methods, the commercial sectors with the explosion of click and collect and online orders, the training sector with distance learning that unfortunately increased the dropout and the millions of needs we have, for instance, in Italy. Needs are those young people who don't work and don't study. Pandemia is undoubtedly not at the origin of this turning point of distancing, but it's true that it has been a significant accelerator of these developments. Beyond the economy sphere of commerce, distancing extends its empire to the culture and relational sphere. Think of Netflix, virtual visits to museums, Apero Zooms during the pandemic. But it's interesting to consider that this distancing, contactless, isolated situation has increased the digital capitalism that has had the possibility to show during this period its great capacity for resilience and adaptation to the major crises of our time. And we are dealing with the loss of one of the five senses, the touch. We keep our family members and our friends away from us in order to protect them. So we are between isolation, contactless, distances, and the need of personal relationship. Next. What is the role in this situation of communication? Everybody, above all young people, know the importance of having the possibility of a free communication, unmoderated, unmediated, bidirectional, two ways, one to many to many, that is so different from the communication I have experienced during my childhood and youth. That was just one way. That was the TV or radio, one way. It was not communication. It was just information. Now, if we need to communicate, we have to understand that the two ways communication needs dialogue and interaction, and that the possibility to be able to build a collective knowledge is so important for humans. And for the first time, we understand that information technology, ICT, is not only useful for improving our life or our work, but it is essential for our survival. Why technology is so important today? Next one. It is important because we experienced during the pandemic, everybody experienced the importance of being connected, the importance of technology, because we were in relationship with many groups, because in general, we are part of many groups of people linked by social, linguistic, moral, religious, family relationships. But also a company, our work, is a sort of group of people that is linked by organizational constraints. Well, technology has helped us to be connected, and without technology, we would have been isolated and marginalized. But it's so important. But why everybody understood in this period the role and the importance of networking? I take care of words. And if I try to define networking, first of all, I have to separate the words. Net means to catch, but also to support. And working, to work or at work, but also it works. And in fact, networking is very, very useful for our empowerment. I want to share with you this idea of 3 levels of networking in a company, at work, also in family, but we are dealing with work today. We have 1 level, operational, let's call. We need colleagues, proactive. We need colleagues to be able to collaborate. We need leaders able to listen, able to argue with transparency. We need employees capable of negotiating, proactive. But on a personal level, it is so important to have a personal relationship also when we are at work, because we learn more from our peers or from those who have had the same experience as we have. But the most important level is the strategic level in a company. And so the awareness of the leaders in a company or CEO to be able to select signals. That means to be able to distinguish between noise and sound, to be able to accept and to listen everybody in our company, in its company, in his company, in her company, in order to be inspired, in order to be able to anticipate social phenomena. Well, all this means that we have to underline the fact that during pandemic, a lot of company, a lot of people understood the importance of changing the mindset. Next. Changing the mindset. This is a slide I like a lot because it is at the basis of social economy. That is the future of our economy, of global economy. So in all organization, we have to take care of these changes from profit to purpose, from hierarchies to network, from controlling to empower, from planning to experiment, from privacy to transparency. What happened owing to pandemic was exactly the acceleration in many companies and in many public administration, an acceleration of change management. That is, they became aware that it was necessary, of the necessity of the transformation of organizational, economic, and communication models require this kind of mindset, a mindset that takes care and into account the needs of people, of persons, of employees, of customers, of the environment, of social interaction and values. So if the change management has to be developed in a company, we have to consider that their processes or issues includes solidarity, sharing, capacity, listening, trust, responsibility, inclusion, reputation. There is no more space or no longer space for personalism, selfishness, or let's say priority in economic return in the shortest possible time. If you invest in reputation, you mean that you are doing an investment at a medium and long terms. Next one. So pandemia has a positive result. And it was the awareness that we are changing from a me company to a we company, and that social economy will be the economy of the future, and that ethics is the engine of innovation. But it's not only this. We have another step that is important. It was absolutely due to this awful experience of being during a pandemic. Next one. We are coming from a concept of a community. You know, the word community belongs to the end of the last century when internet was exploding. communities, a group of persons discussing on the web, and they have common interests, social, linguistic, religious, etc., etc. But there is a big difference between community and this concept of togetherness. And the difference is in the words that I had underlined: solidarity, capacity of sharing, the ability to be able to listen to, empathy, trust, reputation, inclusion and diversity, generosity, and empowerment. Why do I stress all these aspects? Because I think that women can do a lot to reach the right place that belongs to them within a company, in a family, or in a community. But it is necessary that women push on self-empowerment and that they are aware of the values and the skills that distinguish them. A path that also leads to the necessity of building a sort of female leadership that is characterized by precise soft skills and not by emulating male behaviors. I think that it's so important to stress the complementarity between gender, owing to the fact that in the future that is present, we are facing relationship not only people with people, but people with also machines. So it's so important to devote a lot of interest and to those who are considered the soft skills. They are so interesting and so important for the future, a future based on technology. I mean that the complementarity between genders, includes the necessity of an intelligence that is not only natural, that is not only artificial, but should be not only aging means generation packed, but should be emotional. So I think that women are absolutely gifted by many of these competencies and skills that are called emotional and relational. So I think that I want to give a positive view of the future. I think that women can do a lot for their families and for society. I think that I have many competencies that belong to them. And if they invest on themselves, invest on their values and on self-empowerment, I think that the future will be ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gianna. It was a beautiful presentation and amazing slides. I think you don't mind if I keep one shared while we'll discuss it a little bit, because we've got a question right now in chat. And it is related to your last notes, last aspects about the question is from Federica. It's not about the number of jobs that were lost, but concerning the kind of them, related to the female talent that is not as much present in labor market as it used to be before the pandemic. And the question is, should we encourage girls and boys and girls to focus on knowledge-intensive efforts in order to be safer?
Yes, well, it's an interesting question because, you know, when we talk about knowledge-intensive, we don't want to mean. I mean, I think that doesn't doesn't just mean to push for theoretical or sophisticated educational paths, high-level university disciplines, etc., etc. I think that any job deserves attentions. And what counts in the future, and I think that I will encourage women to consider what I am telling now, it's so important to be able to listen the needs of people. So to listen needs in order to serve the person who asks you something. It might be a service, it might be a product, it might be help, doesn't matter. Empathy is something that is the only soft competence that is natural. It has been demonstrated, is part of our brain, female brain. So what does empathy mean? It means that you have to be able, with empathy and culture that is not only technological, but must be also humanistic culture, to be able to listen in order not only to face a need, but to anticipate a need. This is so important at work, but it is also important in family, in the personal relationship. So invest in yourself, invest in soft skills. Of course, you have to have basic skills and professional and technical skills. It doesn't matter in which field, but don't forget the importance of those who are called soft skills.
Thank you so much. And excuse me for a second, I received a technical question from Federica, but it was from a man, from Stefano A. Cherry. So I think that underlines the importance.
Much better, much better.
Kind of question. So
yeah,
our dear participants, if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome.
How do you inspire girls? I can't. There is a question from Danielle.
Danielle, you can ask it yourself. Go ahead.
Well, it's better, so I have to look at. How do we inspire? Well,
so I just want to read the question for everyone, because on YouTube they can't see the chat.
Yeah.
My question was, how do you inspire girls to pursue a career in technology, especially that you had a career in technology like long years ago, especially these days with everything going on and the technology is taking everything?
Okay.
Thank you, Gianna.
Thanks, Danielle. Well, I was born as a humanist because my first study were in Bocconi University at the University of Cattolica of Milano, but the field was not technical. I turned to be a humanist technologist or a technologist humanist, I don't know, when I went to Stanford at the Institute of Mathematical for Social Sciences, and I took part to the first e-learning project that was in 1982-83. Okay. Well, in our association, we have many projects for that are called Ready for Future, and we are inspiring and helping young people starting from the primary school to take care also of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But from STEM, we turn to STEAM. We add A. The A is for arts, humanities, and social sciences, because we think that there are no separated areas in science. Science is science, as culture is culture. And so since we have an holistic view of the technology, if you have an holistic view of technology that seems to be successful today, it was not so successful in 1983, but also at the end of the last century, but now is very, very cool. So we help them to be oriented to all the 4 fields, new materials, energy, biotech, and digital. It's important in this way to be able to put these young girls and males also, and boys, but mainly girls, to be involved in lab in which they have the possibility to experiment. And as everybody knows, if you see, you understand, and if you do, you learn.
Beautifully said.
But to tell the truth, I am convinced, looking at you, and you are very young, I'm so convinced that I think that the future is women, is for women. But we have to invest in self-empowerment. Never stop learning, please. Be curious and have courage.
Thank you for this empowering and inspiring words. I think that would be a very beautiful moment for us to close our session for today. And thank you so much to all of you. It was incredibly interesting, inspiring, and it was a logical continuation of our webinar on smart working. And these beautiful words about keeping studying and keeping learning and keeping dedicating ourselves would be also relevant to our next webinar that will take place on January 15, that is related to paternal leaves, to current situation, needs, and proposals on paternal leaves. Because without solidarity in family, that would be hardly possible. Thank you so much on that. And thanks again to our dear participants, and wishing you all the best, and see you next time on January 15.
Olena, thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Bonjour à tous et ciao à tutte.
Ciao.